Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, it's a new wave in Washington on both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue. Maryland Congressman Chris Van Hollen played a big role in the further bluing of the House. What should we expect from the Obama administration and the Democratic Congress? A far-reaching progressive agenda of health care, education, and more, argues Bob Borosage of the Campaign for America's Future. Joe the Plumber was John McCain and the media's proxy for blue-collar America. We'll chat with Mike Podhorzer of the AFL-CIO about how the working class really voted in 2008. Also, Reuben Jackson reviews a 60s memoir by one-time Dylan girlfriend Suzie Rotolo. Poet Angie Chuang is talking about death in Kabul. And music by BluesWork. On the Coffee House.
Welcome to 21st Century Life here at the Coffee House. Not just a new president will be sworn in January, of course. A brand new U.S. Congress takes office too. And as head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Representative Chris Van Hollen of Maryland's 8th District played a huge role in helping House Democrats nationwide win office, thus adding 22 seats to the party's substantial majority in Washington. Now, both President-elect Obama and House and Senate leaders say clean energy and the quote-unquote green economy will be priority issues. The goal, they say, is to create lots of badly needed new jobs and solve the climate crisis at the same time. But can this really be done? What kind of legislative initiatives can we expect? How soon? Has the moment for transformative action on global warming truly and finally arrived in D.C.? Here to discuss these questions is Congressman Chris Van Hollen himself. Welcome back to the Coffee House.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Well, first of all, were you, and congratulations on your work with the Democratic Party and the DCCC, but were you surprised by the margin of victory for Obama and House and Senate Democrats? Did this surprise you how well it went?
Well, it was great to see how well it went. I guess by Election Day, I'm not sure I was totally surprised because the polls were saying that things were going very well. However, we've all learned that polls aren't always right. And so I was really pleased to see that he had the big margin that he did, especially because we've gotten used to many presidential elections, especially on the Democratic side, where we haven't got a majority of the vote. I mean, there have been third-party candidates. President Clinton did not win with the majority of vote. And in the House races, we were really pleased because we did what the Obama campaign did at the presidential level. We expanded the playing field, which meant that we picked up lots of seats in traditionally Republican territory. People were fed up. I mean, whether you were independents, Democrats, or Republicans, people were fed up. We had good candidates. And this was the first time in history that a party that won a majority in a wave election went on to win another wave election back-to-back. Usually that doesn't happen. Usually when you take back the House in a wave election, you tend to lose seats. So we went on to win another wave election, picked up 22 seats, 24 for the cycle, and there's still some that are still being counted.
Even 3 changed hands in Virginia and Maryland's Eastern Shore, 1st District. Right. But where does this leave you? I know for years you've been called the rising star of the Democratic Party in the House, and now with your stewardship, you've picked up all these seats in the House. Where do you go next? I know Politico, the online magazine, has said today that you will be a special liaison of the House leadership to the White House?
Right. Well, 2 things have happened. One is I did agree to the Speaker's request to stay on for another term at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee as the chair of that committee. This cycle is going to be tougher than the last cycle. We expected the last one to be tougher, but we stayed on offense. This time it's going to be tough holding it, but I was really pleased the Speaker did give me an expanded portfolio within the House Democratic leadership on some policy issues, including as part of the team being one of the people that is working with the White House, because we have something new in Congress for some of us who were elected in the last 4 to 6 years, which is a Democratic president. And so the House leadership really needs people who are going to be working closely with the Obama White House to formulate policy. And I was pleased that the Speaker asked me to, among other things, work with her on that.
Well, clearly you are pre-positioned to be at the center or near the center of a lot of the policy discussions now between the White House and Congress. Your district, the Maryland 8th District, is a particularly environmentally conscious district. What can we see both in what can we expect to see both in Congress and from the Obama administration in terms of environmental policy, particularly this issue of clean energy and climate change?
Sure. Well, that's a big question, and there are lots of things I think you're going to see move forward. Some in the short term, some in the medium term, some in a little longer term. On the short term, number one order of business will be the economic recovery program. Larger investments in infrastructure, and my hope and my hope is, and might not beyond hope, I'm going to be working hard to try and make sure that we have, as part of that, a green job stimulus component. In other words, focus part of that investment on clean energy, not just to get the economy moving again, but obviously to help with climate change as well as our energy independence challenges. So that will be one step. Then there's some sort of medium or short to medium term things we can do, renewable electricity portfolio standards. Then I hope we will move very aggressively as well with the cap and trade approach. So you've got the economic recovery piece, you've got legislation that's already passed the House, got stuck in the Senate. President Bush said he would veto it with respect to renewable electricity portfolio standards, and then you've got cap and trade.
So the renewable electricity, I mean, it's just a clean energy standard. So you would set a lot of states, including Maryland, has set a standard of 15% clean energy by 2012. The federal government, though, has not set a standard. The House passed it, the Senate didn't pass it. So you're optimistic about that. A cap and trade, you know, some sort of cap on carbon emissions. Do you think that finally, I mean, there was a carbon tax as far back as 1994 that passed the House, but we've gotten nowhere since then. Do you see a carbon tax or a cap on carbon dioxide finally come into Washington?
I do. I can't say it's going to be in the first 100 days, but what I can say is that we're going to be moving forward on that issue in a very focused manner. In the last Congress, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, set up a special committee on climate change and energy issues. And that became a forum for the discussion on these issues, collected a lot of information. As we know, the Bush administration was never on board on these issues. The good news is we finally have an administration that believes in science, and the House and the Senate, I'm sure, are going to be committed to moving forward with a science-based policy on climate change. There have been a number of bills that have been introduced already. One, the Safe Climate Act. Henry Waxman's the chief sponsor. I'm a co-sponsor of that. Another bill that I'm on with another colleague of mine would all get us to where we need to go. They have different approaches, and there's a lot more room for new ideas as we get into the new Congress. These bills will be reintroduced. New bills will be introduced. And so we welcome the ideas of people who are watching and people around the country as to the best way to get us there.
Why should people in Maryland, in your state, care about climate change?
Well, I think we all have to care for a number of reasons. Number one, it's going to affect our quality of life in a major way. And in the Maryland, we have a state that is a coastal state, and also with the Chesapeake Bay, we have more miles of shoreline than most states in the country. I mean, it's a huge estuary. It's a national treasure. And, the fact of the matter is, the global effects of global climate change could destroy the bay, could destroy the habitat in the bay, could destroy the resources in the bay. And so I think that, that's just one small example here, small in terms of the globe, big in terms of impact to all of us of climate change. But I think we all know what will happen around the world in terms of rapid climate change, water changes, impact on water, deserts, extremes in heat. Right. The costs are incalculable.
Well, what about the Obama administration? I mean, the president-elect doesn't have to wait just on Congress. I mean, the sausage factory can take a while there, and getting bills out of committee and through both houses and et cetera. But the president has the ability to take certain actions immediately. What might we see from an Obama administration in terms of quick action on this issue of climate and clean energy?
Well, one thing they could do immediately would be to grant California, the state of California, a waiver that would allow them to move forward on their low carbon cars. The state of California says they want to require that cars sold in the state of California have to meet low carbon requirements. There are lots of states that would opt into the California plan, including the state of Maryland, and that would take us a long way toward moving in the right direction. I mean, that would have effectively the same impact of raising the fuel efficiency standards from where they are today, 35 miles per gallon, to approximately 43 miles per gallon if you take that. I mean, it's a different approach, but that's the effective result when you do it that way.
Is it your sense from being close to the party and out there working for an Obama election and meeting the president-elect, is it your sense that Barack Obama gets global warming, that he means it when he talks about clean energy also as a way to stimulate this economy?
Yes. The short answer is yes. I've had the chance to talk to him personally about this issue. I've also heard him on the campaign trail talking about these issues. It's an issue he believes in. He understands what's at stake. And I do believe he's going to move forward very quickly. Again, we face big challenges on the economy, but what he has said is in the next 10 years, he wants to invest $150 billion, about $15 billion a year, into clean energy technology, number one. Number two, you need these drivers. For example, you need the renewable electricity portfolio standards. He's talked about 25% by the year 2020 or 2025 in terms of a renewable electricity portfolio standard. That's a good target to hit. We'd all like to do better, but if we can get there as a nation, that would be a very important goal. And then he's also talked about his cap and trade system, where he wants to say, we're not going to give away the allowances, we're going to auction them, which is the right way to do it because we want to uphold the principle that the polluter pays. And that's how you do it. And that's the way you send a signal to the system that there is a cost to polluting in terms of the generation of power. And obviously we're all feeling the cost in terms of climate change and the extreme weather patterns and the other issues we were talking about.
Well, what about this issue? I mean, a lot of people are saying, well, that these are lofty ideas, President-elect Obama and Congressman Van Hollen, to spend money on not just clean energy, but healthcare, et cetera, but you're looking at $1 trillion deficit this year. How do you reconcile record deficits with these activist policies to finally have a chance to do good things on the environment, for example?
Sure. Well, first of all, we need to get the economy going again. I mean, when you have negative growth, economic growth, revenues are going down. So we need to invest in our economy. I believe we need a Keynesian shot in the arm, and that means more investments. Most economists tell us you need to do at least $150 billion of investments. Some people say $300 billion. We just saw the Chinese that have a lower GDP doing over $500 billion of investment. So you need that to get the economy going. In my view, is you should target some of that investment towards green technology, clean energy, and green jobs. Number one. So there's a need to do that now. There's no doubt we face a fiscal problem in the out years. And we're going to need to find ways to tighten our belt. But you have a short-term proposition and a longer-term proposition. With respect to the longer term, we're going to have to look for ways, especially in the healthcare field, to do things smarter. And Obama's talked about trying to incentivize the system for more preventive measures, because right now in the Medicare program, for example, we spend a lot fixing things when they're broken. Mm-hmm. We don't incentivize the system to prevent things from getting worse. We all think we could save money and have better health outcomes. So those are some of the areas where we may be able to find some savings. With respect to cap and trade, I should say, it doesn't cost the government anything. What it does is finally require the polluter to pay. Now, there's no doubt that when you place a cap on carbon, we need to be straight with the American people. There are costs to complying. And the question is, how are we going to deal with that added cost? One idea, which I'm currently exploring, is this cap and dividend proposal, where any additional cost that was passed on will be captured through the allowances mm-hmm. that are sold, and then the government can rebate some of those funds directly to the ratepayer. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, the polluter pays, but the consumer ends up getting the money back And you can use that money for whatever you want. Maybe you'll spend it on more energy efficiency.
So you would cap carbon dioxide levels, the carbon companies would pay for it, but these dividends would go back to all American citizens. It is an idea that's gaining traction for nothing else, for its simplicity. I mean, the Lieberman-Warner bill, the last big climate bill that was at least sort of debated in the U.S. Senate, was so complicated, 400 plus pages or more, and the attractiveness of the cap and dividends bill is its simplicity. I want to ask you about Rahm Emanuel. Okay, he used to have your job with the DCCC, chair of the Democratic caucus, now chief of staff of the next administration. How does that affect Congress? I mean, obviously there's some advantages. What might they be for someone like you, Speaker Pelosi, in trying to move legislation through the House? Right.
Well, it's very helpful to have somebody in that key position as chief of staff to the president who knows Congress. And Rahm Emanuel knows Congress both from the political side of things as well as the policy side of things. He's been at the seat of the table with the Democratic leadership. He can pick up the phone, as of course can Barack Obama, having served in the Senate. But together, obviously, they can pick up the phone. Rahm can reach people. Obviously, the president can reach anybody, anytime he wants. But having been there and worked through that process effectively, I think is going to give President-elect Obama a big lift, because you look back at past administrations. And one of the problems was that they did not develop good working relationships with the Congress. And I think that this administration will do that, and I think that will benefit the American people in terms of our ability to get things done together.
Well, I mean, there's a growing sense of urgency on at least the climate side. I mean, we'd like to be able to take a generation, or 20, 30, 50 years to restore climate equilibrium on this planet by getting off fossil fuels. But the scientists, of course, are saying we have maybe 10 years, and therefore we have to push harder and faster. There's some concern that Rahm Emanuel is kind of a centrist at heart, a deal maker, that maybe he's not pre-positioned for the kind of rapid movement on climate change. What would you say to that?
No, I think that, yes, he's a pragmatist when it comes to getting things done, but he also understands the stakes here. And the fact of the matter is, he understands the urgency of this issue, and I'm sure that working with the President-elect, who has been very clear on this issue as to where he is, that we have a great chance now of moving forward. I mean, we have spent the last 7 or 8 years essentially digging ourselves a deeper hole that we got to dig ourselves out of now. But I'm confident that we'll move forward, not just here at the home front, but internationally. I mean, one of the first things the President Bush did was walk away from the negotiating table in Kyoto. I'm sure this president will re-engage with the international community, and that's going to be essential, because we know that the Chinese are bringing on coal-fired plants at a very rapid pace. The developing countries, India, China, and others, are going to be using more and more energy per capita. This is a global problem. From a global warming perspective, it doesn't matter if the carbon dioxide is emitted from here or halfway around the world. And so if we don't engage the international community, we will be nowhere. We can't use that as an excuse for inaction here at home.
Right.
And that's what the Bush administration did. But neither can we ignore the fact that if we don't get a handle on this internationally, we really haven't solved the problem.
There are those who say that that Barack Obama, because of the inaction of the Bush administration and the sort of go-it-aloneness and rejection of climate action for 8 years, that the only way Barack Obama is going to be taken seriously by the international community on the issue of climate change is if he first passes climate legislation in the United States. Do you think those are related, that in order to get the world's attention, we've got to show some action at home?
You absolutely have to show some action at home. We have to lead by example, especially after 8 years of essentially neglecting our leadership responsibilities. But at the same time, we've got to engage the international community. I think you can do them together. I mean, I think the international community understands that there's already a big difference between the policies being articulated by President-elect Obama and President Bush. So I think that he can move forward on an international agenda as we work on this issue at home, because As you know, we've got the next international meeting coming up at the end of next year.
That's right.
I believe. And
well,
so
there's Poland gathering in December of this year, but the big one's Copenhagen next year.
Right.
Right.
And so I think that we need to do everything we can between now and then to show that we're moving seriously here, but also spend some time right now laying the groundwork for an international agreement.
Well, very briefly, in the minute or so that we have left, the issue of Detroit. I mean, Detroit I heard on the radio today that General Motors stock is almost worth nothing now, and they're calling on the government to allow Detroit to get some of the $700 billion in the financial bailout recently. What is your stand on that?
Well, my view is that we should give the administration the authority to help the auto industry here, not just the financial sector. The Bush administration says that under the bill, they can only deal with the financial sector. The issue is the thousands and thousands of jobs around this country that are tied to a successful automobile industry. So I believe if we're going to intervene to help the financial industry, there's an argument to be made for helping out. However, it should be condition-based. Number one, obviously we should protect the taxpayer in terms of taking ownership interests, making sure CEOs don't have a big compensation. But just as importantly here is to make sure if the American people are going to be helping Detroit, that Detroit has got to finally take responsibility for really building cleaner cars. They have for years been behind the curve here, and now they're saying, oh, it's your guys' fault. The fact of the matter is they've got to take responsibility for this. They got to build cleaner cars, and any support for Detroit must be conditioned on that.
Well, a big thanks to Congressman Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. Clearly, something big is coming soon to Washington on climate change and clean energy policy. We'll just have to stay tuned and watch closely for the details. I'm Mike Tidwell.
In Kabul, day breaks. The call to prayer chases sunrise, haze of dreaming dissolves in the arcing voice from the mosque loudspeaker. A donkey brays like a crazy fiddler, crescendos until an F-16 rakes across morning, screaming like a joyrider. The people of Kabul look up from prayer. Night takes hold. Could there be a night as pitched as the lull after the lights go out, waiting for the generator's sputter? Acrid diesel wafts black onto black. The women hold their knives still, dinner's progress suspended. They imagine eggplants, olives, and figs spilling into night's unfeeling gullet.
It's interesting and more than a little ironic that Suzie Rotolo, author of A Freewheelin Time, a memoir of Greenwich Village in the 60s, considers the decade in question overrated. Maybe I too am the victim of 1960s nostalgia, but Rotolo's book, which richly details her pre- and post-Bob Dylan years, Rotolo's the woman on the cover of Dylan's Freewheelin collection, provides us with a consistently riveting portrait of the social, political, and musical changes taking place in the village, as well as the inevitable changes that occurred when the rest of the world discovered that rich artistic scene. Yes, Rotolo was there, but to her credit, she doesn't turn Freewheelin into either a tawdry tell-all or an unabashed name-dropping session. Names like Dylan, Odetta, and Allen Ginsberg are integral players in Rotolo's environment, not mere vehicles used to establish her credibility. Even her bittersweet recollection of her time with Bob Dylan is as understated as a whisper. Dylan's ascent into stardom and its toll on their relationship is an important part of the story, but like Dylan, Rotolo's life didn't end with their affair. Nor does Freewheeling peter out as the decade draws to a close.
When Rotolo referred to the 60s as overrated, perhaps she was addressing our sometimes simplistic assessment of the period. Freewheelin paints a considerably more complex and sometimes contradictory picture of the good old days. For Writer's Block, I'm Reuben Jackson.
Welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. The Obama victory can be chalked up to an historic candidacy, an extraordinary campaign organization, an electorate that's been tacking leftward, endless wars, and an economy that's in the tank. There's another dimension that seldom gets attention: the battle-scarred progressives who've fought the Reagan Revolution from its birth to its demise, and who've mapped the agenda for a new progressive era. Bob Borosage is such a veteran, a former director of the Institute for Policy Studies and senior issues advisor to Jesse Jackson's 1988 presidential campaign. Bob is the president of the Institute for America's Future and co-director of its sister organization, the Campaign for America's Future. Welcome to the Coffee House.
My pleasure.
All right, now the 2008 election was, this is a multiple choice question for you, all right? A reaction to economic collapse, an unpopular war, and a weak Republican ticket tied to a failed incumbent president. B, a one-off historical opportunity to elect the first African-American president. C, a reflection of an emerging Democratic progressive majority and era in the U.S. D, all of the above.
Certainly D, all of the above.
But balance it out for us.
Well, you know, the conditions were there for a real change. People are looking for a change because of the failures, the catastrophic failures of conservatism. And at the same time, you had this extraordinary candidate who, with his calm in many ways and his elegance, reassured Americans that despite his inexperience, he was a leader that they could look to. And the election really turned around the financial collapse of Lehman Brothers in that 10 days when it looked like all of global capitalism was going to fall, when McCain sort of looked in a kind of tinsel hysteria, you know, kind of suspended his campaign, came to Washington, blew up an agreement, left, wasn't going to do the debate, did the debate, and throughout that period, Barack Obama demonstrated, I think, the calm and the intelligence that people were looking for, and ironically became the person who gave people reassurance as opposed to the veteran McCain. Then the third part of this is there's no question that you have seen in 2004, the beginnings of it, 2006 certainly, now 2008, the emergence of a progressive majority in this country that has the potential of being an enduring majority for progressive change. You know, if you look at the elements of the constituents that voted Barack Obama and gave him the first majority that any Democrat has won since Jimmy Carter, that, as Chris Van Hollen said earlier, that gave Democrats back-to-back victories in both houses and picking up seats first time since the Great Depression, there's the beginnings here of something that may be quite extraordinary.
Well, let me suggest that the one-off is a significant factor here, that yes, there is this trend toward progressives, toward Democrats that we saw in the 2006 race, we've seen again in 2008. But this was an opportunity to make history for people, and I think a lot of people got swept up in that opportunity, kind of the reverse Bradley effect. And I'm wondering if an Obama administration can't deliver pretty quickly, whether that luster will be lost and the opportunity to have another historic presidential race isn't there unless it's next time with a Latino candidate or a woman candidate, that the African-American candidate as a novelty has been now used up. So you really have to deliver, right?
Well, you have to deliver no matter what. I think that people are going to be more patient than people suggest, though. Most Americans have been suffering under this economy even when it was supposed to be prosperous, and have been struggling to keep their heads above water, and finding that it's been harder and harder to keep a hold of the American dream as wages have stagnated even when the economy was supposed to be good. Now they see this as a very serious crisis. They've watched housing values plummet. That's the leading investment most Americans have. They've seen now their jobs beginning to be threatened. Healthcare is already broken. So they're looking for big change, but I suspect they're going to be a lot more patient than people think. They understand it took a long time to get us into this hole. It's going to take us a while to get out.
I saw something really interesting on Election Day, which I spent in Morrisville, Virginia, which is in South Fauquier County. Very Republican area and the most Republican portion of the county. Rural, 10% African American. And I was at the polls doing voter protection that day. And a striking number of people who looked like they might have jumped out of an ad for the McCain campaign when they came by said, "I'm voting for Obama."
Well, you know, Obama, the polling results are quite extraordinary. Obama did 10 points better, 10 percentage points better than John Kerry did among white men. He won the Catholic vote. Now, some of that was because of a larger turnout of Hispanics, but he won Hispanics 2-1. All the constituents that pundits said he would have a hard time winning, union workers, they voted 60-40 Obama. Hispanics voted 2-1 Obama. He won unmarried women 70-29, 70-30. It's extraordinary margins. And of course, young people, when you talk about the one-off candidacy, I think the young generation really not only feels touched by this candidate, but they were very much responsible for his victory, particularly in the primaries. It was that energy that helped him build the organization that allowed him to beat the odds-on favorite, Hillary Clinton. And so they're going to feel an ownership of this guy in a way that you know, we haven't seen among young people before. So I think that energy was dramatic, and that constituency, the largest generation now in America, seems to be more and more wedded to the Democratic Party and a real building block of a new majority.
So there's a mandate for change. The whole campaign was thematically about change, and he won a resounding victory. But Speaker Pelosi says that it's important for the next administration and for Congress to govern from the center. Big issues before the country. Do you expect a big response from the administration?
Well, all the signs seem to be pretty good. You know, I think that all the talk about governing from the center, I think, is a little misleading. You know, the center moved. You don't have to move to meet it. The vast majority of Americans and the majority of Americans voting in this election are voting for dramatic change. And this election was fought out, really. McCain chose to fight the election on the basis of economics, and it was really a choice between what Barack Obama described as the failed philosophy, essentially, of Reaganism, of trickle-down economics, where you give tax cuts on the top and expect it to trickle down on the rest of us, and deregulation and privatization, and what McCain called redistributionist socialism. You know, the Barack Obama progressive taxation, investing in education, healthcare, affordable healthcare for all.
Which Obama called opportunity.
That was the ground that this election was fought on, and redistributionist socialism won. So, you know, people really made a choice for a dramatic different course with some significant elements to it: energy, affordable healthcare. A different kind of economic strategy. Those were getting out of the war in Iraq. Those were the centerpiece of the debate. And when we did an election eve poll on why people voted, those were the things people were voting for and the expectations they have. So there's not only a mandate, but that mandate has some substance to it.
But there's a divide already that's evident between people who really want to push hard. Today, this is November 10th, and
in the New York Times today, Paul Krugman, the economist, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, was arguing that
FDR's approach to the New Deal was too conservative, but elsewhere on the op-ed page was an argument that there's no way that the Democrats can overcome a filibuster because they don't have the votes to do it in the Senate, so you have to go tread softly.
Well, you know, one of the things we asked in our poll was we asked people whether Republicans should support Obama, give him the benefit of the doubt, and help pass his program, or whether because he's leading in the wrong direction that would be bad for the country, they should oppose him. And the number on that was 75 to 25, that they should support Obama. Republicans, incidentally, split, but independents and Democrats, moderates and liberals overwhelmingly want people to give this guy that they just elected his head and let him try to make something happen. So I think the filibuster is going to be used rarely, but it's not going to be used the way it was as a kind of systematic program of obstruction over the last 2 years. People are looking for change, and Republicans are going to have to find a way to get on board.
Let's talk about the financial bailout a little bit. It was a kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't circumstance, I think, for members of Congress. If they didn't vote for the bailout, they could be accused of causing the collapse of the global economic system. If they did vote for the bailout, then they're accused of being toadies for Wall Street. I understand that Obama got on the phone, called a lot of new members of Congress in particular, and pressured them to vote on the second vote for the bailout, and that in fact he was successful in moving the Democrats to support it. Is that your understanding? And if that's the case, what does that tell us about him?
Well, there's no question he made the phone calls. I think people were flocking to that position because, if you remember, the stock market crashed after the first plan blew up, and it just panicked the Congress. The more interesting thing to me, because that was, you were in a situation of extreme crisis there where you don't have power. The power was with the Treasury Secretary who put the plan forth, and with the Republicans who were going to decide whether something went forward or not. And all you could do was stop it. You couldn't do an alternative. More interesting to me was the speech Obama gave at the Cooper Union earlier when the crisis first started, which was, without any question, the best speech that anyone in politics gave about the kind of regulation we ought to do of the shadow banking system, and laid out, going so far as to talk about we've got to change compensation systems so that people don't have the personal incentive in millions of dollars of personal compensation to take excess risks. It was a smart, very aggressive speech in the middle of a campaign that laid out a serious position. And so the hope is that it's the position that his own position will be reflected in his policies, not the choice he had to make in that kind of crisis where he really was out of power and had very few options.
One aspect of the election perhaps points in a different direction, and that is on social issues. In particular, the vote on gay marriage in California and 2 other states that failed. And one interesting demographic aspect of that vote was that Obama's candidacy brought out an historic vote from the African American community, and apparently that also had an impact, a negative impact, on the passage of gay marriage rights.
Right. And the vote in California where they took marriage rights away with the referendum was really disappointing. One of the things, though, that's interesting, we fought this battle now in 2 election cycles. 4 years ago, these referendum around gay rights seemed to have a significant effect, particularly in battleground states. This year, they had no effect beyond themselves electorally. And one of the reasons for that is, as we've argued about these issues, people have grown more and more tolerant. So the polling that asked people, is homosexuality something that we should discourage, or is it something that is normal and we should just accept it? Those numbers have gotten better and better and better and better the more we've argued about it. So even though these initiatives went down, right now, attitudes about tolerance and about acceptance and about the support for gay civil rights are higher than they have ever been since we started keeping track of them. So I think we're winning this argument. It's going much more slowly than we'd like, but there's real progress being made, and just the process of talking about it, of getting it out of the cloud, so to speak, and getting people to think about their relatives and the reality of gay couples and has transformed values already in this country and will continue to do so.
Let's talk about the role of organizations like your own. This is going to be a center-left presidency and Congress.
And majority in the country.
And majority in the country. How does an organization like your own intervene in that environment in order to push it in the direction presumably further left?
Well, that's exactly the role we look to play. Roosevelt had the famous meeting with Representative Sidney Hillman of the labor unions, where they talked about a substance of measures that he wanted done, and the story goes, Roosevelt says, "Well, I agree with you totally. Now go out there and make me do it." And And that's our job. Our job is to raise the bar on the promises that have been made, define them in, at the level they need to be good for the country, to actually deal with the problems. Push very hard in the administration and in the Congress to get their reform program to reflect that. And then as the reform program goes forward, go after the legislators that are standing in the way. And those will be in both parties, and it will need a lot of pushing to get a lot of these reforms done. And I think in that way we play a role both in supporting the administration, but also in pushing the administration. And any president who wants to bring about change understands how important it is to have people mobilized that are pushing him, and he can point to them as pushing him and helping him cut a better deal.
Many thanks to Bob Borosage of the Campaign for America's Future for sharing his vision for a new progressive era and his expectations for the Obama administration and the deepening Blue Congress. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
Gotta do this, I gotta do that. Gotta do this, I gotta do this and that. I do the run around, run around, run around, run around, run around, praying I don't lose my mind. I got two great kids, a big dog and a cat. Gotta take them here, gotta take them there. I do the run around, run around, run around, run around, run around, praying I don't lose my mind. What happened to the days time was on my side? The good old days could rock and roll all night. Now I get high when I sip my tea. Be alone and just be with me. I got a spouse, got a job, got a house and 3 cars. Got everything I want, but I'm all fussed up. I do the run around, run around, run around, run around, run around, praying I don't lose my mind. Oh, let's run around. Gotta run around. I gotta run around. Yeah, run around. Run around. Run around. Run around. Run around. Praying I don't lose my mind. Gotta run around. I gotta run around. Yeah, run around, run around, yeah, run around, praying I don't lose my mind.
Welcome to WorkLife at the Coffee House, where, like all over the country, we're discussing what was the most remarkable election of my lifetime, and I've been around for a while. I'm very pleased to have as my guest Mike Podhorzer, who was one of the people in the middle of the fray for the entire campaign. Mike is the Deputy Director of the AFL-CIO's Political Department, and his role was helping to mobilize the vote of union workers in support of Barack Obama. Mike, thanks so much for joining us at the Coffee House today. How did union members vote in this election?
Well, AFL-CIO members voted 67% for Barack Obama and 30% for McCain, which was a really strong showing for Obama, and we're very proud of that.
Well, could you break that down a little? I mean, who are members of the AFL-CIO and the labor movement, and how did their vote compare to the vote of similar demographics in the broader population?
Right. Across the board, union members of the AFL-CIO, voted 30 to 50 points more for Obama than their similar demographics. For example, Barack Obama among one of the more conservative groups in America, the weekly going white churchgoers, actually won those among union members and lost with the general public by 50 points. If you go demographic group by demographic group, white men, white women, non-college educated voters, in each of these instances, he was getting in the high 50s to 70% of the vote, and those same demographics in the rest of the population, McCain was winning.
Wow. And in the outset of the campaign, we heard that Barack Obama was having trouble winning the support of white blue-collar workers. Was that true at the beginning of the campaign, and did that change? I mean, those are pretty remarkable statistics that you cited.
Right. I think that the Republican strategy, the McCain strategy from the outset, was to create that paradigm and to basically, as they looked at the electoral map, they saw that their path to victory had to go through states like Michigan or Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and that their best target was, they felt, what they called their Reagan Democrats, bringing them back to the Republican Party. But those, at least insofar as they're members of unions, have drifted away from the Republican Party pretty strongly since the 1980 election, and they've pretty much had enough of what's going on. And so basically the battle was fought for the non-college blue-collar worker because that's where McCain chose to strike. He did it not necessarily with him directly, but there was just a lot of smears aimed at Obama, as everybody knows, and a lot of attempts to get people to vote against Obama because he was relatively new to the scene and because of race and so on.
Well, you mentioned race. I mean,
yeah.
Was race a factor amongst union members? Was that something that you addressed, and was that a factor, and how did you deal with it?
Well, I think that in the end, it was not a factor. I think at the beginning, underneath the TV ads, there was a great deal of misinformation going out about Barack Obama. I mean, that he was a Muslim, that he was a terrorist, that he wasn't a patriot, didn't hold his hand over his heart, and so on, and during the pledge. And our strategy was to not pretend that that wasn't happening, but to go out and take people, our union leadership, who have credibility with workers, and say that's just baloney, and that the real issues are what's going to happen to your pension, what's going to happen to Social Security, your health care, are you going to have a job in a few years, and don't listen to all of this stuff, because it's not true, and it's not what this election is about.
Well, you seem to have had some success in driving that message, especially if what
Right.
we were hearing in the beginning was true. How did you do it? I mean, you say you had leadership talk
Right.
to, but tell me, what does this look like on the ground? What did the union campaign vis-a-vis its own membership look like?
Sure. The most important thing about and really unique about the union campaign in American politics right now is that it is so, it's systematically about people talking to people. And it isn't big TV ad buys, it isn't a lot of impersonal outreach. It's just one union member, one local president, shop steward, talking to workers and saying, this is what the issue is, this is where Obama stands, this is where McCain stands, and, you know, basically educating members. And I think that explains why there's such a difference between how union members vote and how their comparable demographic votes if they're not in a union. It's because they have someone that they respect telling them in person that what the truth is.
So, and where did these conversations take place?
How
did the one-to-one conversation happen?
The most significant way it happened was in the workplace, and in our polling after the election, half the union members remember being talked to in their work site by a steward or some local union president, so forth, which is really pretty impressive when you think about just the scale of having conversations with, 6 million people. The second way was union volunteers going door to door to their fellow union members, and it really makes an impression on you if someone who you know works just as hard as you work is taking their time off in the evening or over the weekend when they could be doing something else, and they think it's important enough to tell you about Barack Obama.
I remember maybe a month or month and a half before the election, reading on some blog somewhere, it made an impression on me. You were quoted as saying that your polling of union members showed that a significant percentage, 15 or 20%, were still, I believe the word was persuadable, so that things hadn't really locked in, 5-6 weeks before the election.
Right.
Was that true? And if so, what changed that? I mean, what did lock people in?
Right. I think that a few things happened. I think it was definitely true. Mm-hmm. I think that for the first half of the general election season, John McCain did his best to make the election a referendum on Barack Obama, to basically say, to really play on implicit racism and on a sense that he was not like you. And that battle was going on to basically a draw until the beginning of September. And then economic conditions and President-elect Obama's incredibly strong shift towards a more populist message had a big effect on the numbers. And basically by around September 16th, the McCain effort, which had kept the race pretty much tied, had exhausted itself. And people looking in the face of the financial crisis, looking at the audition that both of them had had with the crisis, where Obama was so steady and McCain was so erratic, decided that maybe Obama wasn't such a risky choice after all. And going alongside that, what you had was in the union vote was the accumulated effect of 6 months of talking about race and talking about Obama and talking about what the country needed. And that kicked in as well. And after that, the election was pretty much over.
So I know you did a lot of polling, and you actually saw from the beginning, the middle to the end, a real change in attitude?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this was a landmark election. It was, Barack Obama started with being much less well known than McCain. McCain had a very strong story in terms of his experience as a prisoner of war, in terms of his branding himself as a maverick, and all of that. And the first part of the campaign was really about showing people that McCain wasn't a friend of workers, that Obama was, that he wasn't really different from you or me, that he actually had the same aspirations, the same values, and that he was on your side.
So here we are, with President-elect Obama. What does he have to do to vindicate this support, to show to union members that they made the right choice, and to make them feel good about how they voted?
I think that he starts off with a lot of goodwill and support, because to the extent that he embarks on a path of addressing first and front and center the economic crisis in the country, and he does it in a way that does not amount to a giveaway to the major corporations, that he's looking out for workers, I think that he'll continue to have the trust of union workers. I think that if he doesn't, he won't, but I'm pretty confident that he will. And
are there any particular issues that you think are central?
Sure. I think that providing a strong enough economic stimulus by having programs that create jobs in the United States, I think people, the Republican prescription was cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes, and create jobs. All we saw was job loss. If Obama goes out there, rebuilds our infrastructure, goes for green jobs, then I think the vote will be vindicated.
Great. Well, thank you, Mike Podhorzer of the AFL-CIO, for giving us an inside look at the role the labor movement played in this election. It's clear that change is coming, but just what that change will mean for working men and women is something we're going to be talking about in the weeks and months ahead. I'm Fred Feinstein, and this has been WorkLife.